The taste of innocent blood still stains my lips when I remember the moment everything changed. My name is Captain Aurelius Thane, formerly of the Lunar Wolves Legion, currently branded traitor by both sides of this galaxy-spanning war. I held a dying child in my arms on Isstvan V, and that single act of compassion damned me more thoroughly than any oath to the dark gods ever could. You think that makes me weak, but you don't know what I've seen. In the grim darkness of this civil war, I've learned that mercy is the greatest heresy of all, more dangerous to both loyalist and traitor than any weapon ever forged. They tell you this war is about loyalty versus betrayal, order versus chaos, but they never mention the third path, the one that leads through compassion straight into damnation. This is my testimony of the heresy they'll never record in any history. Chapter 1. The Faithful Son. The morning that would define the rest of my existence began in the assembly halls of the Vengeful Spirit, flagship of the Lunar Wolves Legion. I stood at attention with my battle brothers, our white ceramite armor polished to mirror brightness, bolter and chainsword maglocked to my power armor with the precision that marked 17 years of Astartes service. Warmaster Horus Lupercal himself stood before us, his massive frame casting shadows across the assembled warriors. Even among the superhuman Astartes, he was a giant, nearly 3 meters of enhanced muscle and bone wrapped in Terminator armor that gleamed like captured starlight. His charismatic features bore the noble bearing of one born to command galaxies, though I noticed subtle changes since our return from the Serpent Lodge on Davin. His eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, darkness that seemed to swirl with hidden knowledge. My sons. His voice resonated through the chamber's vox amplifiers, reaching every warrior present. Today, we embark upon the greatest crusade in human history. Not the conquest of worlds or the expansion of borders, but the liberation of mankind from the tyranny of false gods and corrupt institutions. The words should have filled me with the familiar fire of righteous purpose. For decades, I had followed the Warmaster's banner across 1,000 worlds, bringing compliance to human colonies lost in the Age of Strife. The Great Crusade had been humanity's golden age. Unity restored, knowledge recovered, the species finally taking its rightful place among the stars. But something in Horus's tone made my enhanced senses prickle with unease. This wasn't the rhetoric of compliance or expansion. This was the language of revolution, of fundamental change that would reshape the very nature of Imperial civilization. The Emperor, Horus continued, his voice dropping to a register that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul, has withdrawn to Terra, abandoning the armies that conquered the galaxy in his name. He concerns himself with secret projects while we bleed and die in distant systems. He styles himself a god while forbidding all others from claiming divinity. A murmur ran through the assembled Astartes, not disagreement, but the sound of warriors recognizing truths they'd long suspected but never voiced. The Emperor's withdrawal from the Great Crusade had been a source of confusion and resentment among many legions. We had given everything to his vision of human unity, only to watch him retreat to his palace while the work remained unfinished. But there are older powers, Horus said, his eyes now definitely holding something that hadn't been there on Terra. Ancient forces that offer truth instead of lies, strength instead of weakness, freedom instead of servitude. They have shown me the future that awaits humanity under the Emperor's rule. Eternal stagnation, technological regression, the slow death of everything we've fought to achieve. Captain Ezekiel Abaddon stood at the Warmaster's right hand, his black eyes burning with the fervor of absolute conviction. To his left, Captain Garviel Loken maintained the stoic expression that marked him as one of the Legion's most disciplined warriors. But I could see the tension in Loken's posture, the subtle signs that suggested internal conflict. The galaxy burns, Horus continued, his voice rising with passionate intensity. Worlds cry out for liberation from the Emperor's oppression, and we, his finest warriors, his most loyal sons, will answer that call. We will tear down the rotting edifice of the Imperium and build something better in its place. The chamber erupted in cheers and battle cries, 10,000 voices raised in acclamation of their Primarch's words. But not all voices joined the chorus. I noticed pockets of silence, warriors whose loyalty to the Emperor ran too deep to be easily overturned. Captain Loken was among them, his face now openly troubled despite his efforts to maintain proper military bearing. After the assembly, I found myself walking the ship's corridors in a daze. 17 years of service had taught me to follow orders without question, to trust in the wisdom of my superiors and the righteousness of our cause. But what I'd heard in that chamber wasn't wisdom, it was sedition. Revolution against the very foundation of everything we'd sworn to protect. My quarters were Spartanly furnished, as befitted an Astartes warrior. A weapon rack, a meditation alcove, a simple cot that I rarely used thanks to the catalepsian node that allowed me to rest while remaining alert. On the wall hung a purity seal blessed by the Emperor himself during the ceremony that had inducted me into the Lunar Wolves. A reminder of the oaths I'd sworn and the purpose that had defined my existence. I knelt before the seal, trying to find clarity in its familiar symbolism. The Aquila spread its wings in eternal vigilance, the skull beneath representing the price of service to the Imperium. Simple iconography, but it carried the weight of everything I'd believed in since my transformation from mortal flesh into something greater. But now that certainty was cracking, like overstressed ceramite. A soft chime announced a visitor at my door. Captain Loken entered, his weathered features showing the strain of the day's revelations. Like me, he was a veteran of the Great Crusade's earliest campaigns, one of the warriors who'd stood beside the Emperor when humanity first reached for the stars. "Aurelius," he said quietly, settling into the chamber's single chair. "We need to talk." "About the Warmaster's speech," I replied. It wasn't a question. Loken nodded grimly. "About what it means, about what we're being asked to do." He paused, his enhanced senses automatically scanning for surveillance devices before continuing. "This isn't compliance or liberation. This is civil war." The words hung between us like an accusation. Civil war, the one catastrophe that could destroy everything the Great Crusade had achieved. Brother against brother, legion against legion, the Imperium tearing itself apart while humanity's enemies gathered in the darkness. "The Warmaster has his reasons," I said carefully, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "Perhaps the Emperor truly has abandoned us. Perhaps change is necessary." "Change, yes," Loken agreed, "but not this kind of change. Not revolution built on betrayal and bloodshed." His eyes met mine, and I saw the same conflict reflected there that I felt in my own hearts. The Emperor isn't perfect, but he's still our father, still the one who lifted us from the barbarism of old night and gave us purpose among the stars. Before I could respond, my Vox unit crackled with an incoming transmission. Squad-level priority, marked for immediate attention. The message was brief but clear. All company commanders were to report to the Strategium for mission briefing. Operational deployment in 6 hours. Loken and I exchanged grim looks. Whatever philosophical crisis we were experiencing would have to wait. The Warmaster had work for us. The Strategium buzzed with activity when we arrived. Tactical displays showed star charts marked with red indicators, target worlds that had remained loyal to the Emperor despite the Warmaster's declaration of independence. Names I recognized from compliance actions during the Great Crusade. Worlds that had welcomed Imperial rule and contributed to humanity's expansion. "Our first objective," Horus announced to the assembled commanders, "is Paramar V, a forge world that produces ammunition and equipment for loyalist forces. The population numbers approximately 2 billion, mostly adepts and servitors dedicated to manufacturing operations." The display shifted to show detailed planetary schematics, massive factory complexes, orbital shipyards, defensive installations that could resist conventional assault, but also civilian hab blocks, educational facilities, medical centers, all the infrastructure of a thriving Imperial world. "Resistance is expected," Captain Abaddon added. his scarred features showing anticipation rather than concern. The Forge World's defense forces remain loyal to the Emperor. Orbital bombardment will be necessary to soften primary targets before ground assault. And the civilian population? The question came from Captain Tarek Torgadon, another veteran whose loyalty to the Legion ran deeper than ideological conviction. Horus's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Paramar V has chosen its allegiance. Those who stand with the false emperor share his fate. The implications were clear. This wouldn't be a compliance action with terms offered to surrendering populations. This would be extermination, the systematic slaughter of billions of human beings whose only crime was remaining loyal to the Imperium that had protected them for decades. Sir? I found myself speaking before conscious thought could stop me. The civilian population includes families of Imperial Guard veterans, children born into loyal service, workers who've contributed to the war effort for generations. Surely there must be alternatives to wholesale slaughter. The strategium fell silent. Every eye turned toward me, and I could feel the weight of attention like a physical pressure against my enhanced nervous system. Horus studied my face with the intensity of a predator evaluating potential prey. Captain Thane, he said slowly, his voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. Do you question the necessity of our cause? I question the methods, my lord, I replied, maintaining eye contact, despite every instinct screaming at me to look away. The Great Crusade succeeded through offering choice, compliance, or destruction. Perhaps Paramar V might be given the same opportunity. The time for choices has passed, Abaddon interjected, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. Those who are not with us are against us. Mercy is a luxury we can no longer afford. But Horus raised a hand, silencing his first captain. No, Ezekiel. Captain Thane raises a fair point. His smile held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a commander weighing tactical variables. Very well, Aurelius. Since you advocate for mercy, you will lead the assault on Paramar V's primary civilian center. Show us how compassion serves our cause. The assignment was clearly intended as punishment, a way to force me to confront the logical conclusion of my objections, lead the attack on innocent civilians, or admit that mercy had no place in the new order Horus was creating. I understand, my lord, I said simply. As the briefing continued, I found myself studying the faces of my battle brothers. Some showed the burning conviction of true believers, warriors who had embraced Horus's vision of liberation through destruction. Others displayed the grim acceptance of soldiers following orders regardless of personal feelings. But a few, including Loken and Torgadon, showed the same troubled uncertainty that I felt in my own enhanced hearts. The Lunar Wolves had always prided themselves on their unity, their absolute loyalty to the Warmaster and to each other. But I could see fractures beginning to form, hairline cracks in the bonds that held us together. Whatever we were becoming, we were no longer the Legion that had stood beside the Emperor at the walls of his palace. As the briefing concluded and officers began filing out to prepare their companies, Horus called my name. I remained at attention while the strategium emptied, leaving me alone with the Warmaster and his inner circle. Aurelius, he said, his voice now carrying the paternal warmth that had once inspired such devotion among his sons. I know this is difficult. Change always is, but you must trust that I act for the good of our species, even when the path seems dark. I have always trusted you, my lord, I replied honestly, but trust requires understanding, and I confess I struggle to understand how slaughtering loyal Imperial citizens serves humanity's interests. Horus nodded as if he'd expected the question. Because loyalty to a false ideal is worse than honest opposition. The Emperor has poisoned their minds with lies about his divine nature and the necessity of his rule. They cannot be reasoned with or converted. They can only be replaced with populations who understand the truth. And if they refuse to understand, then they die, Abaddon said flatly, as do all enemies of the new order. Looking into the Warmaster's eyes, I realized that the man I'd followed across the galaxy was truly gone. Whatever had happened on Davin, whatever powers had whispered in his ear. They had transformed him into something that wore his face, but no longer shared his soul. "I will carry out your orders, my lord," I said, because there was nothing else to say. To refuse would mean death or exile, and either would prevent me from protecting the innocent civilians caught in this war's path. But as I left the Strategium to prepare my company for deployment, I knew that everything had changed. The Great Crusade was over. The age of civil war had begun, and somehow I would have to find a way to serve mercy in a conflict that had no room for compassion. Chapter 2. First Doubts. The drop pod bay of the Vengeful Spirit thrummed with preparation as my company readied for deployment to Paramar V. 300 Astartes warriors checking weapons, reviewing tactical data, and performing the rituals that preceded battle. But the familiar pre-combat atmosphere felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that we were no longer fighting for compliance, but for extermination. Sergeant Crotus approached my position near the tactical display, his scarred features showing the strain of a veteran warrior grappling with uncomfortable orders. 23 years of service together had taught me to read the subtle signs of his discomfort, the way his left hand clenched and unclenched, the slight tightening around his eyes when he thought no one was watching. "Captain," he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the din of preparation, "the men are asking questions about our mission parameters. Word is spreading about the Warmaster's new directives." I studied the faces of the warriors around us, noting the same uncertainty I saw in Crotus. These were veteran Astartes, survivors of hundreds of compliance actions during the Great Crusade. They'd seen every form of warfare the galaxy could produce, but they'd always fought with clear moral purpose, bringing unity to scattered human worlds, protecting civilians from Xeno's predators, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "About rules of engagement, about civilian populations, about whether we're still fighting for the Emperor's vision or—" He paused, struggling with words that bordered on treasonous, or something else entirely. Before I could respond, the bay's Vox system crackled with an incoming transmission. Captain Loken's voice, strained with controlled urgency. "All company commanders to the forward observation deck. Priority Alpha." I left Crotus to continue preparations and made my way through the ship's corridors, passing groups of Lunar Wolves warriors who fell silent when they saw me approaching. The atmosphere aboard the Vengeful Spirit had changed dramatically since the Warmaster's declaration. Where once there had been boisterous camaraderie and easy confidence, now there was tension and whispered conversations that stopped whenever officers appeared. The forward observation deck offered a spectacular view of Paramar V hanging in the void ahead. The Forge world glowed with the amber light of its twin suns, its surface marked by the geometric patterns of massive industrial complexes. Orbital shipyards hung in synchronous orbit like metallic flowers, their construction bays busy with vessels under construction for the loyal Imperial forces. Captain Loken stood at the main viewport, his white armor reflecting the planet's glow. Beside him, Captain Torgadon maintained his usual stance of relaxed alertness, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. Both men turned as I approached, their expressions carrying news I suspected I wouldn't want to hear. "Aurelius," Loken said without preamble, "we've received updated intelligence on Paramar V's defenses. The situation is complicated." The tactical display activated, showing detailed scans of the planet's surface. Red markers indicated military installations and defensive positions, but yellow markers outnumbered them 10 to 1. Civilian population centers, hospitals, schools, and hab blocks that housed the Forge world's 2 billion inhabitants. "The Forge Master has rejected the Warmaster's ultimatum," Torgadon reported, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by grim professionalism. "But he's also refused to evacuate civilian areas. He's betting that we won't fire on our own people." "Smart man," I said quietly, studying the density of civilian markers throughout the target zone. "He knows the old Lunar Wolves wouldn't massacre innocent humans for political advantage." "But we're not the old Lunar Wolves anymore," Loken said, his voice carrying bitter recognition. "The Warmaster has made that clear. Any hesitation to follow orders will be seen as proof of continued loyalty to the Emperor. The implications were staggering. If we followed the mission parameters exactly as briefed, we'd be committing genocide against Imperial citizens, whose only crime was refusing to betray their oaths. But if we showed mercy and attempted to minimize civilian casualties, we'd be marking ourselves as unreliable in the eyes of our new commanders. There's more, Torgadden added reluctantly. Word from other companies suggests that this is a test. The Warmaster wants to see which of his captains have truly embraced the new order and which still cling to old loyalties. A test. I should have realized that Horus's assignment carried deeper meaning than simple tactical necessity. By forcing me to lead an assault on civilians, he was determining whether my objections in the Strategium represented genuine philosophical concerns or lingering loyalty to the Emperor. What about our men? I asked. How are the rank and file responding to the new directives? Loken and Torgadden exchanged glances that carried volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Loken spoke with the careful precision of a man delivering dangerous intelligence. Mixed reactions. Perhaps half the Legion has embraced the Warmaster's vision completely. They see this as liberation from false constraints. Another quarter follows orders regardless of personal feelings, as they've been trained to do. But the remainder... He paused, choosing his words carefully. They're struggling with the contradiction between their oaths and their orders. And if that struggle becomes open rebellion, then we'll have civil war within the Legion as well as within the Imperium, Torgadden said flatly. Brother against brother, squad against squad. Everything the Great Crusade achieved, destroyed by our own internal conflicts. The observation deck fell silent as we contemplated the magnitude of the crisis facing us. The Lunar Wolves had always been united in purpose and loyalty, but that unity was fracturing under the pressure of impossible choices. We could follow the Warmaster into damnation, or we could resist and tear the Legion apart in the process. There might be a third option, I said slowly, an idea beginning to form in my mind. What if we found a way to accomplish our mission objectives without massacring civilians? Capture key strategic points, neutralize military resistance, but offer terms to non-combatants. The Warmaster specifically ordered total destruction, Loken pointed out. Any deviation from those parameters would be seen as defiance. Not if we achieved better results than expected, I countered. If we could capture Paramar V's industrial capacity intact while eliminating resistance, that would serve the new order better than destroying everything out of spite. It was a thin rationalization, but it offered a potential path between outright rebellion and complicity in genocide. If I could frame mercy as tactical advantage, perhaps I could save innocent lives without marking myself as a traitor to the Warmaster's cause. It's risky, Torgadden said after a moment's consideration. If the Warmaster sees it as defiance disguised as tactical initiative, then I'll face the consequences alone, I replied. But I won't lead my company in a massacre of innocent civilians, not while there's any alternative. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff into empty space, but I knew there was no other choice I could live with. The Emperor had created the Astartes to be humanity's protectors, not its executioners. Whatever the Warmaster had become, whatever powers now whispered in his ear, I would not betray that fundamental purpose. You'll need allies, Loken said quietly. Captains who share your concerns and are willing to risk the Warmaster's displeasure for the sake of their own consciences. I have you two, I replied. That's not enough, Torgadden said bluntly. 3 companies might make a difference in a single engagement. But if this becomes a pattern, if the new order consistently demands atrocities from loyal Astartes, we'll need broader support to maintain any hope of resistance. He was right, of course. Individual acts of mercy might save some lives, but they wouldn't change the fundamental nature of what the Lunar Wolves were becoming. If we wanted to preserve anything of the Legion's original character, we'd need to organize like-minded warriors into a coherent faction. Start quietly, I decided. Sound out other company commanders. See who shares our concerns. But be careful. Too much organization too quickly, and we'll be seen as planning rebellion. Aren't we? Loken asked with dark humor. Planning rebellion, I mean. What else do you call organized resistance to the Warmaster's orders? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Were we plotting treason against our Primarch and our Legion? Or were we trying to save both from the corruption that was consuming them? The line between loyalty and rebellion had become impossibly blurred. We're trying to save what's worth saving, I said finally. The Great Crusade began with noble purpose, uniting humanity and protecting the innocent. If that purpose can't survive in the New Order, then perhaps the New Order isn't worth preserving. The ship's Vox system interrupted our conversation with a priority alert. All company commanders report to drop pod bays. Deployment in 30 minutes. The Emperor protects. The traditional benediction sounded hollow now, given that we were deploying against the Emperor's loyal servants. I wondered if the Vox operator had included it out of habit, or as a subtle reminder of older loyalties. Time to go, Torgaden said, straightening his armor and checking his weapons. Whatever we decide to do, we'd better decide fast. As we walked back toward the drop pod bays, I found myself thinking about the nature of loyalty and duty. For 17 years, those concepts had been simple. Serve the Warmaster, follow orders, protect humanity from its enemies. But what happened when the Warmaster's orders threatened humanity itself? What happened when duty required betraying everything you'd sworn to protect? The drop pod bay had transformed into a scene of organized chaos. 300 Astartes warriors made final preparations for combat, their movements carrying the practiced efficiency of veterans who'd done this countless times before. But I could see the uncertainty in their postures, hear it in the subdued conversations that marked this deployment as different from all the others. Sergeant Crotus approached with a final status report. All squads ready for deployment, Captain. Weapons loaded, objectives confirmed. He paused, then added quietly, "The men are ready to follow your lead, sir, whatever you decide." The weight of command had never felt heavier. 300 lives under my authority, each one trusting me to make decisions that honored both their training and their consciences. In 30 minutes, we'd drop into combat against fellow humans who'd committed no crime except loyalty to the Emperor. Understood, Sergeant, I replied. Tell the men we'll accomplish our mission, but we'll do it with honor intact. As the final countdown began, I offered a silent prayer to whatever powers might be listening. Not to the Emperor, whose light seemed increasingly distant, not to the dark forces that whispered to the Warmaster, but to the simple human hope that mercy might find a way to survive in a galaxy that had forgotten its meaning. The drop pod bay doors opened, revealing the amber glow of Paramar V below. Time to discover whether compassion could coexist with duty, or whether I was about to lead my company into damnation for the sake of an impossible ideal. The first shots of what would become known as the Horus Heresy were about to be fired, and somehow I would have to find a way to serve mercy in a war that had no room for compassion. Chapter 3, Lines Crossed. The drop pod. His impact with Paramar V's surface rattled my enhanced bones, despite the shock absorbers built into my power armor. Around me, 10 Lunar Wolves warriors completed their post-landing checks with the mechanical precision of veterans, but I could see the tension in their movements. None of us had ever deployed against loyal Imperial forces before. The very concept violated everything we'd been trained to believe about our purpose. Squad Tertius reporting successful deployment, I voxed to the company command net, establishing perimeter around landing zone Alpha. The responses came back quickly. 9 other squads confirming safe landings in and around Hive Mortalis, Paramar V's primary civilian center. 2 billion souls lived within the massive structure that pierced the planet's orange sky, and our orders were to pacify all resistance and secure compliance through whatever means necessary. I activated my auto-senses and surveyed the landing zone. We'd come down in a commercial district filled with hab blocks, merchant stalls, and small workshops that served the Forge World's civilian population. The architecture was standard Imperial Gothic, soaring buttresses and armored windows that spoke of humanity's perpetual war against a hostile galaxy. But there were also signs of prosperity. Clean streets, well-maintained buildings, propaganda posters, celebrating the Forge World's contributions to the Great Crusade. These people had been loyal. They'd sent their sons to serve in the Imperial Guard, tithed their production to supply Crusade fleets, celebrated every victory won in the Emperor's name. Now we were here to kill them for refusing to betray those loyalties. Movement, bearing 270, reported Brother Maximus, my squad's heavy weapons specialist. Looks like PDF forces establishing defensive positions. Through the enhanced vision of my helmet's auto sensors, I could see them. Perhaps 50 Planetary Defense Force troopers in carapace armor, their las rifles trained on our position. Good soldiers following their oaths, preparing to defend civilians against what they rightfully saw as traitor space marines. Sir, Sergeant Crotus's voice crackled through the Vox. First and third squads report contact with civilian evacuation convoys, requesting permission to engage. The moment of truth had arrived faster than I'd expected. Somewhere in the hive's lower levels, my warriors were facing terrified families trying to flee the violence, and they were asking for permission to murder them in the name of tactical efficiency. Negative, I responded immediately. Do not engage civilian targets. Repeat, do not engage non-combatants. Focus on military objectives only. Sir, the mission parameters specifically state... The mission parameters are my responsibility, Sergeant, I cut him off. Carry out your orders. But even as I spoke, I could hear the sound of bolter fire echoing through the hive's metal canyons. Other companies were following their orders exactly as briefed, showing no mercy to anyone caught in their path. The systematic slaughter of Paramar V had begun, and I was already marking myself as an unreliable commander by refusing to participate. Captain Thane, a new voice joined the Vox channel. Captain Abaddon, the Warmaster's first among equals, his tone carrying disapproval that bordered on menace. Reports indicate your advance has stalled. Explain. I keyed my Vox to a private channel, hoping to avoid broadcasting my defiance to the entire company. Encountering organized resistance, sir. Taking time to minimize unnecessary casualties while securing objectives. Unnecessary casualties? Abaddon's laugh held no humor. Every soul on this world is an enemy of the new order. There are no unnecessary casualties, only insufficient commitment to our cause. The communication cut off, but the message was clear. My reluctance to follow orders exactly as briefed had been noted and would be reported to the Warmaster. Whatever protection my veteran status might have provided was rapidly evaporating. Contact front. Brother Maximus's shout drew my attention back to immediate tactical concerns. The PDF forces had emerged from cover, advancing with disciplined fire and movement, despite facing superhuman opponents. Brave men and women who knew they were going to die, but chose to buy time for civilian evacuations rather than surrender. Suppressing fire only, I ordered. Drive them back, don't annihilate them. My squad responded with the precision of trained killers, but I could hear the confusion in their movements. Astarte's warriors were designed for overwhelming violence, not careful restraint. Asking them to hold back against armed opponents went against every instinct bred into their enhanced biology. The PDF troopers fell back under our fire, dragging their wounded with them in good order. Professional soldiers retreating to secondary positions rather than rooting in panic. They'd buy their civilians maybe 10 more minutes. Not much, but enough to save some lives if the evacuation convoys could reach the spaceport. Captain, Brother Lexus, my squad's Vox operator, reported new intelligence. Intercepting PDF communications. They're calling for orbital support from the defense platforms. The orbital defense platforms were powerful enough to threaten even Astarte's positions, but they'd been designed to repel external threats, not to fire on the planet's surface. If the PDF could convince the platform commanders to engage us despite the risk to civilian areas, this quick strike could turn into a protracted siege. More concerning was what orbital bombardment would represent, loyal Imperial forces choosing to risk civilian casualties, rather than allow traitor space marines to complete their mission unopposed. It would demonstrate that both sides in this civil war were willing to sacrifice innocent lives for tactical advantage. Sir, Sergeant Crotus reported from his position near the hive's primary transit hub. We've secured the transport nexus, but there are still civilian convoys trying to evacuate through the northern passages. Orders. Another test. I could order the transit hub sealed, trapping thousands of civilians in the hive for easier elimination later. Or I could allow the evacuations to continue, directly undermining the mission's stated objectives. Let them go, I decided. Focus on military targets only. Understood, sir. But I could hear the doubt in Crotus's voice, a veteran sergeant questioning his captain's orders for the first time in 20 years of service together. The corruption spreading through the Lunar Wolves wasn't just philosophical, it was practical, turning warriors against their officers and brothers against each other. The Vox crackled with a new transmission, this one on the Legion command frequency. Captain Loken's voice, strained with urgency. All companies, be advised. Long-range sensors detect inbound reinforcements. Imperial Navy vessels, 2 hours out. 2 hours. Enough time to complete our mission if we followed orders exactly as briefed, but not enough time for the careful, selective operations I was attempting. The approaching Loyalist fleet would force a choice between efficiency and mercy. Captain Thane, Abaddon's voice returned to the command net, carrying unmistakable threat. Your sector remains non-compliant. Accelerate your timetable, or I will deploy additional companies to complete your objectives. Additional companies meant warriors who would follow orders without hesitation, who would kill every living soul in the hive to ensure mission success. My attempt to preserve civilian lives was about to be rendered meaningless by commanders who saw mercy as tactical failure. Understood, First Captain, I replied. Accelerating operations. I switched to my company frequency and began issuing new orders. Not the wholesale slaughter Abaddon expected, but something that might appear to comply while actually preserving as many lives as possible. All squads, priority shift to infrastructure targets, communications arrays, power generation, transport hubs. Make the hive uninhabitable but avoid civilian concentrations where possible. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. Not aggressive enough for the Warmaster's vision, not merciful enough for my conscience, but it might keep my warriors from having to choose between their oaths and their orders for a few more hours. The next 90 minutes passed in a blur of controlled violence. My company systematically destroyed Paramar V's ability to function as a military asset while avoiding the worst atrocities. We disabled communications rather than slaughtering operators. We destroyed power plants rather than hab blocks. We captured ammunition depots rather than executing their defenders. But around us, the other companies were following their orders exactly as briefed. The sound of mass bolter fire echoed through the hive's corridors as Captain Abaddon's warriors eliminated anything that moved. Smoke from burning residential areas darkened the sky. The screams of the dying carried on the wind like a funeral dirge for the Great Crusade's original ideals. Captain, Brother Lexus reported with obvious discomfort. Intercepting civilian transmissions. They're calling us devils. Traitors who've betrayed everything the Emperor taught. Out of the mouths of the innocent. These people understood what we were becoming better than we did ourselves. We'd been humanity's protectors for so long that we'd forgotten we could choose to become its destroyers instead. Sir, Sergeant Crotus approached my position, his scarred features showing the strain of the last 2 hours. The men are asking questions about our mission, about why we're fighting other humans instead of Xenos or heretics. The same questions I'd been asking myself since the Warmaster's declaration aboard the Vengeful Spirit. The questions that had no good answers because we were serving a cause that couldn't be justified by any rational moral framework. Tell them we serve the Legion, I said, because it was the only answer I could give. We follow our oaths and trust in our commander's wisdom, but Crotus's expression suggested he found that answer as unsatisfying as I did. A veteran sergeant losing faith in his captain's judgment, his Legion's purpose, his place in the galaxy's grand design. The fractures in the Lunar Wolves were spreading to the squad level now. The Vox crackled with an emergency transmission from the fleet command. All ground forces, prepare for immediate extraction. Imperial Navy reinforcements arriving ahead of schedule. 30 minutes to weapons range. 30 minutes to complete a mission that should have taken 6 hours. Impossible if we followed proper tactical doctrine, but entirely achievable if we simply killed everyone in sight and called it victory. First Captain Abaddon to all companies, the Vox announced with unmistakable finality. Operation concludes in 25 minutes. Any objectives not secured by that time will be eliminated by orbital bombardment. Clear the target zones. Orbital bombardment. The final escalation, turning the planet's surface into a burning wasteland rather than accept partial success. 25 minutes for my warriors to evacuate their positions and watch as everything we tried to preserve was destroyed from space. I looked at the faces of my squad, warriors who'd followed me across the galaxy, who'd trusted my judgment in 100 battles against humanity's enemies. Now they were waiting for orders that would define not just this mission, but who we were going to become in the civil war that was consuming the Imperium. All squads, begin withdrawal to extraction points, I ordered. Mission complete. It wasn't complete, of course. Half the Hive's military infrastructure remained intact. Thousands of civilians had escaped to tell other worlds about the Lunar Wolves' betrayal, and my company's reluctance to follow orders exactly as briefed had been noted by the Legion's new leadership. But we'd avoided the worst atrocities, preserved some innocent lives, and maintained at least a shred of the honor that had once defined the Emperor's finest warriors. As we lifted off from Paramar V's surface, I watched through the transport's viewports as orbital lances began falling from the sky. Precision strikes that turned the Hive into a funeral pyre, ensuring that no witnesses would survive to report the Lunar Wolves' moment of mercy. The Horus Heresy had begun with fire and betrayal. But somewhere, in that burning Hive, a few hundred civilians were still alive because some warriors had chosen compassion over orders. It wasn't much of a victory, but in a war where mercy was the greatest heresy of all, it was enough to give me hope that humanity might still be worth saving. Chapter 4. The Test of Loyalty. The return to the vengeful spirit felt like entering a tomb. The ship's corridors, once filled with the easy camaraderie of warriors returning from successful compliance actions, now echoed with tension and whispered conversations that died when officers approached. The Lunar Wolves' Legion was eating itself from within, consumed by doubts that no amount of discipline could suppress. I made my way to the company debriefing chamber, my power armor still bearing scorch marks from Paramar V's burning Hive. Behind me walked Sergeant Crotus and the other squad leaders, their faces showing the strain of warriors who'd been forced to question everything they'd believed about their purpose and their loyalty. The debriefing should have been routine. Tactical analysis, lessons learned, equipment status reports. Instead, it became an interrogation disguised as standard procedure. First, Captain Abaddon stood at the chamber's head, his black eyes scanning each face with the intensity of a hunter evaluating prey. Behind him, Captain Loken and Captain Torgadden maintained careful neutrality, but I could see the warning in Loken's posture. Be careful what you say, because everything will be reported to the Warmaster. Captain Thane, Abaddon began without preamble. Your sector objectives showed a completion rate of 63%. Explain this failure. Failure. The word hung in the recycled air like an accusation. In the old Legion, anything above 50% completion would have been considered acceptable given the time constraints. But we weren't operating under old standards anymore. Organized resistance was heavier than intelligence suggested, I replied carefully. PDF forces fought with exceptional discipline, requiring additional time to neutralize without excessive casualties to our own forces. Excessive casualties. Abaddon's voice carried dangerous amusement. Your company suffered 0 fatalities and minimal armor damage. Meanwhile, other companies achieved near total objective completion despite facing similar resistance levels. Because other companies had simply killed everyone in sight, rather than attempting selective targeting. Because they'd followed the Warmaster's new philosophy that mercy was weakness and compassion was betrayal. But I couldn't say that without openly confessing to the sedition Abaddon suspected. Perhaps their approach was more direct, I conceded. Direct, Abaddon repeated, savouring the word. Yes, Captain Harkis's company was very direct. They eliminated 17,000 potential enemy combatants in their sector alone. Captain Mortis achieved similar results. Even Captain Loken's company, despite certain philosophical reservations, completed their objectives within acceptable parameters. The comparison was deliberate. Other company commanders who'd shown reluctance to embrace the Warmaster's vision had still found ways to follow orders effectively. I was being marked as uniquely problematic, insufficiently committed to the new order. My methods achieved tactical objectives while preserving Legion assets, I said, trying to frame mercy as military efficiency. Infrastructure targets were neutralized, resistance was broken, and our forces remained at full combat effectiveness. But thousands of enemy personnel escaped elimination, Abaddon countered. Personnel who will now carry word of our operations to other loyalist worlds. Personnel who will testify to the Imperium about Lunar Wolves' tactics and capabilities. He was right, of course. The civilians I'd allowed to evacuate would spread word about the Legion's betrayal, providing intelligence that might help loyalist forces prepare for future encounters. From a purely tactical standpoint, my mercy had compromised operational security. Sir, Sergeant Crotus spoke up, his veteran status giving him license to address superior officers directly. Permission to comment on operational effectiveness? Abaddon nodded curtly. The men performed admirably under difficult circumstances, Crotus said carefully. Facing fellow humans for the first time required psychological adjustments. Captain Thane's leadership helped maintain unit cohesion during a challenging deployment. A diplomatic way of saying that my restraint had prevented his squads from fragmenting under the strain of following immoral orders. But I could see Abaddon wasn't interested in psychological considerations, only in results measured by body counts and destruction totals. Psychological adjustments, Abaddon mused. Perhaps that's the real issue here. Perhaps some warriors are too attached to old loyalties to embrace necessary change. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone present understood that we'd crossed from tactical criticism into ideological interrogation. Abaddon wasn't just questioning my performance, he was evaluating my fitness to continue serving in the Legion. My loyalty to the Lunar Wolves is absolute, I replied, choosing my words with extreme care. I have followed the Warmaster across the galaxy for 17 years. I will continue to serve as long as he has use for my abilities. But loyalty to the Legion isn't the same as loyalty to its current mission, Abaddon observed. The Warmaster has set us on a new path, one that requires abandoning certain sentimental attachments. Some warriors adapt quickly to new realities. Others cling to outdated concepts. Outdated concepts like mercy, like protecting the innocent, like serving humanity rather than conquering it. The very foundations of what the Astartes had been created to represent. I serve at the Warmaster's pleasure, I said simply. Abaddon studied my face for a long moment, his enhanced senses no doubt analyzing micro-expressions and stress indicators that might reveal my true thoughts. Whatever he saw, there seemed to satisfy some internal calculation. Indeed you do, he said finally. Which brings us to your next assignment. The tactical display activated, showing a star chart marked with a single red indicator. A world I didn't recognize, orbiting a yellow star in the segmentum solar, close enough to Terra that Imperial response would be swift and overwhelming. Moloch, Abaddon announced. A night world that has declared continued loyalty to the Emperor, despite the Warmaster's offer of alliance. Population approximately 50 million, mostly agricultural communes and night households that trace their lineage back to the dark age of technology. 50 million souls. 10 times the population of Paramar V. And these were people who'd preserved ancient human traditions through the worst periods of galactic history. Night pilots who'd fought alongside the Emperor himself during the early years of the Great Crusade. The Warmaster requires a demonstration, Abaddon continued, something that will convince other worlds of the futility of resistance. Moloch will serve as that demonstration. What kind of demonstration? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Total extermination. Every soul, every structure, every trace of human habitation. When we're finished, Moloch will be a monument to the cost of defying the new order. The words hit me like physical blows. Not selective targeting or infrastructure destruction, but genuine genocide. The complete elimination of an entire world's population for the crime of loyalty to the Emperor. 50 million people, including children who'd never even heard of the Warmaster's rebellion, condemned to death for their parents' political choices. Sir, I said carefully, such extensive operations would require significant logistical support. Perhaps other companies would be better suited. No, Abaddon cut me off. The Warmaster specifically requested your company for this assignment. He believes it will provide excellent training in the new operational standards we'll be employing throughout the Civil War. Training. They wanted to use the massacre of 50 million innocents as a learning experience, a way to break whatever psychological barriers prevented me from embracing wholesale slaughter. The assignment was designed to force me into becoming the kind of monster the Warmaster needed for his war against the Emperor. Timeline? I asked, because refusing the assignment outright would accomplish nothing except my own execution. 6 standard weeks, Abaddon replied. The Warmaster wants thorough work, not hasty slaughter. Every settlement catalogued, every survivor hunted down, every trace of resistance eliminated. Moloch will become a case study in the proper conduct of pacification operations. 6 weeks to systematically murder 50 million people. Enough time to savor every atrocity, to document every detail, to ensure that no shred of mercy or compassion survived the process. It was psychological warfare directed not at the enemy, but at me and my warriors. Understood, sir, I said, because there was nothing else to say in front of Abaddon and his loyalists. The debriefing concluded with routine administrative details, resupply schedules, personnel transfers, maintenance priorities. Normal military business proceeding as if we hadn't just planned the extinction of an entire world. As the other officers filed out, Captain Loken approached my position. Aurelius, he said quietly. A word? We walked in silence to one of the ship's observation lounges, a space normally used for recreation and informal gatherings. Now it felt like a conspirators' meeting place, somewhere dangerous truths could be spoken without fear of official oversight. You know what this is, Loken said without preamble. A test, I replied. A way to determine whether I can be salvaged for the new order or whether I need to be eliminated as a security risk. More than that, the Warmaster is using you as an example to the rest of the Legion. Prove that even the most reluctant warriors can be broken and rebuilt in his image. Show that mercy is a weakness that can be overcome through sufficient pressure. The implications were terrifying. If I succeeded in carrying out the Moloch assignment, I'd be demonstrating that any Astartes could be transformed into an instrument of genocide given proper motivation. If I failed or refused, I'd be proving that some warriors were irredeemably compromised by old loyalties and needed to be purged. What would you do? I asked. Loken was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the star field beyond the viewport. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent sleepless cycles grappling with impossible choices. I don't know, he admitted. Part of me says, find a way to minimize the damage, save who you can, document the atrocities for future accountability, preserve some record of what we've become. But another part says that compromise with genocide is still complicity. And the third option? Open rebellion. Refuse the assignment, rally like-minded warriors, fight to preserve what honor remains in the Legion. He paused, then added quietly, and probably doom everyone we're trying to save in the process. Because open rebellion would simply result in other companies completing the assignment, while we were executed for treason. The civilians of Moloch would die regardless, but at least this way I might find opportunities to preserve some lives. There might be a fourth option, I said slowly. An idea beginning to form in my mind. What if the mission encountered unexpected complications? What if Molech's defenses proved more formidable than intelligence suggested? Loken's eyes sharpened with understanding. Tactical delays that provide time for evacuations, equipment failures that prevent thorough area denial, intelligence failures that allow resistance networks to survive. Sabotage disguised as incompetence, I agreed. It wouldn't save everyone, but it might preserve enough survivors to maintain the world's population base for eventual recovery. Dangerous, Loken warned. If the Warmaster suspects deliberate obstruction, then I'll face the consequences alone, I said. But I won't transform my company into a genocide unit without a fight. As we prepared to leave the observation lounge, Loken gripped my shoulder with the familiarity of a battle brother who'd shared blood and bullets across a dozen worlds. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I believe you're making the right choice. The difficult choice, but the right one. Outside the viewport, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the civil war that was tearing the galaxy apart. Somewhere among those distant lights, Molech waited, 50 million souls who had no idea that their loyalty to the Emperor had marked them for extinction. But they would learn that even in the darkest hours of civil war, some warriors still remembered what it meant to serve humanity rather than conquer it. The Horus Heresy was demanding that we choose between loyalty and mercy. I had found a way to serve both, even if it cost me everything I'd spent 17 years building. Chapter 5. Molech's Stand. The approach to Molech took 18 days through the warp, time I used to quietly prepare my company for the most difficult assignment of our existence. Not the tactical preparation. That was routine for veteran Astartes warriors, but the psychological preparation for what would either be our finest hour or our complete damnation. I stood in the company's primary assembly chamber, looking at 300 faces that trusted me to lead them through whatever hell awaited. These were warriors who'd followed me through the fires of Ulanor, who'd stood beside me when the Emperor himself had inspected our battle line after the victory. Now, I was about to ask them to betray everything they'd sworn to protect. Brothers, I began, my voice carrying across the chamber's vaulted space. Our mission on Molech will test us in ways that no previous deployment has. We will face choices that have no clear answers, follow orders that challenge our understanding of duty and honor. The assembled Astartes listened with the focused attention of warriors receiving critical intelligence. But I could see the questions in their enhanced eyes, the confusion of soldiers who'd never been asked to question their purpose before. The Warmaster has commanded us to eliminate all resistance on Molech, I continued carefully, to ensure that no trace of defiance remains to inspire other worlds. This will require extreme measures. Sergeant Crotus raised his hand, his scarred features showing the concern of a veteran who'd learned to read between the lines of official briefings. Sir, what exactly constitutes resistance in this context? The question cut to the heart of our moral crisis. Under traditional compliance doctrine, resistance meant armed forces and military installations. But the Warmaster's new philosophy defined resistance as any refusal to embrace his vision, including civilian populations who maintained loyalty to the Emperor. That will be determined as tactical situations develop, I replied, choosing ambiguity over explicit orders that would force immediate moral choices. But remember, we are warriors of the Lunar Wolves Legion. We have always served with honor, and that will not change regardless of the challenges we face. It was a coded message, and I could see understanding dawn in the faces of my most experienced sergeants. We would find ways to maintain honor, even if it meant creatively interpreting our orders. The exact methods would depend on circumstances, but the commitment to preserving some shred of human decency was clear. Brother Thaddeus, one of my newest squad leaders, raised a concern that I'd been dreading. Captain, reports from other companies suggest significant changes in operational doctrine. Are we expected to adopt similar innovations? Other companies had begun implementing practices that violated every principle of the Great Crusade, executing prisoners, targeting civilian populations, using human shields to protect their own positions. The innovations that were transforming the Lunar Wolves into something unrecognizable. We will accomplish our mission using tactics appropriate to our heritage and training, I said firmly. The Lunar Wolves have always been the Emperor's finest. That excellence will be our guide on Molech. After the briefing, I retreated to my quarters to review intelligence reports on our target. Molech was a night world, home to aristocratic houses that piloted massive war machines inherited from humanity's golden age. The planetary population was organized around agricultural communes that supported the night households, creating a feudal society that had preserved ancient human traditions through 10,000 years of galactic chaos. The planetary defense forces included 12 night lancers, 144 war machines ranging from nimble scouts to massive siege engines that could challenge even Astartes' formations. But more concerning were the people themselves. Molech's population had maintained an unbroken chain of loyalty to the Emperor since the early years of the Great Crusade. They would fight to the last breath rather than surrender to traitor legions. A soft chime announced a visitor at my quarters. Captain Loken entered, his expression carrying news that I suspected would complicate our already impossible situation. "Aurelius," he said without preamble, "we've received updated intelligence on Molech's strategic value. It's not just a night world, it's one of the Emperor's personal protectorates. He spent significant time there during the early Crusade, establishing defense pacts that go beyond normal planetary compliance." The implications were staggering. Molech wasn't just another world that had declared loyalty to the Emperor. It was a place that held special significance for the master of mankind himself. Attacking it would be seen as a direct challenge to the Emperor's authority, a symbolic declaration that the Warmaster considered no place sacred. "There's more," Loken continued. "Long-range astropathic communication indicates that Loyalist forces are already mobilizing to reinforce Molech. Imperial Guard regiments, Space Marine companies from loyal legions, possibly even elements of the Custodian Guard. A trap. The Warmaster was sending us to attack a world that the Emperor would defend personally, knowing that the resulting battle would be bloody enough to eliminate any Lunar Wolves who retained questionable loyalty. If we died fighting overwhelming Loyalist forces, we'd be martyrs to the new order. If we somehow succeeded, we'd be so stained with innocent blood that redemption would be impossible." "How long until Imperial reinforcements arrive?" I asked. "Estimates range from 6 to 8 weeks, Loken replied. "Enough time to complete our mission if we follow standard extermination protocols. But if we encounter significant resistance or operational delays, we'd be trapped on-world when the Emperor's forces arrived, forced to fight a defensive action against our former allies while standing over the graves of 50 million innocents. The perfect conclusion to our transformation from protectors into destroyers." The Warmaster knows, I realized. He's planned this as our final test. Succeed in massacring Molech's population, or die fighting the Emperor's loyalists. Either way, we're eliminated as a factor in his calculations. Loken nodded grimly, which gives us limited options. We can follow orders exactly as briefed and complete the genocide before reinforcements arrive. We can attempt your sabotage plan and risk being caught between Molech's defenders and Imperial relief forces. Or we can find a third option, I finished. Something that preserves lives without marking us as traitors to either side. But what third option could exist in a situation designed to force impossible choices? How could we serve both mercy and duty when the two had become mutually exclusive? The answer came to me as I studied the tactical displays showing Molech's surface geography. The world was dotted with ancient ruins, archaeological sites that predated the Age of Strife, possibly even the Dark Age of technology. Ruins that might hold secrets important enough to justify preserving the world's population for detailed examination. "Loken," I said slowly, "what if Molech's strategic value isn't just political? What if we discovered something that made the world too valuable to destroy?" His eyes sharpened with understanding. "Archaeological findings that require detailed study, technical artifacts that need careful preservation, strategic intelligence that demands extensive interrogation of local populations." Exactly. If we can discover or create evidence of sufficient value, we might be able to reframe our mission from extermination to occupation and study. It was still a thin rationalization, but it offered hope of preserving lives while maintaining the appearance of following orders. The challenge would be finding or fabricating evidence compelling enough to convince the Warmaster that Molech was more valuable intact than destroyed. The ship's Vox system interrupted our planning with an announcement from the bridge. All personnel, prepare for transition to real space. Molech system entry in 30 minutes. Through my quarter's viewport, I could see the swirling energies of the warp beginning to fade as the vengeful spirit returned to normal space. Somewhere ahead lay a world that would determine not just our fate, but our definition of honor itself. Time to discover what we're really made of, I said to Loken as we prepared to join our companies. The next few hours would see us deployed against a world that represented everything noble about the Imperial ideal: loyalty, courage, the preservation of ancient human heritage. We'd been ordered to destroy it all in the name of a new order that valued power over principle. But we'd also been given an opportunity to prove that mercy could survive even in the darkest hours of civil war. That some warriors would choose to protect the innocent regardless of personal cost. As the vengeful spirit achieved orbit around Molech, I offered a silent prayer to whatever powers might be listening. Not to the Emperor, whose authority we were betraying. Not to the dark forces that whispered to the Warmaster, but to the simple human hope that compassion might find a way to triumph over orders. The drop pod deployment would begin in 6 hours. 6 hours to finalize plans that would either save 50 million lives or damn us all for the attempt. In the grim darkness of civil war, mercy had become the greatest heresy of all. But sometimes, heresy was the only honorable choice remaining. Molech awaited below, its blue-green surface unmarked by the fires of war. Soon, that would change forever, but perhaps not in the way the Warmaster expected. The test of our souls was about to begin. Chapter 6. False Discoveries. The Ruins of Malax. Tertius stretched across Molech's northern continent like the bones of some long-dead titan. Pre-age of strife architecture, possibly dating back to humanity's golden age, the structures had withstood 25,000 years of weather and neglect. Now they would serve as the foundation for either our salvation or our ultimate damnation. I knelt in the central plaza of the archaeological site, my enhanced senses analyzing the ancient stonework while my company established a defensive perimeter. Around me, structures that had once housed millions of humans rose into Molech's azure sky, their purposes lost to time, but their grandeur still evident in every carefully carved line. Magnificent, Brother Lexicon observed, his role as the company's lawkeeper making him sensitive to historical significance. These architectural patterns suggest a level of technological sophistication that exceeds current imperial standards. The builders understood principles of construction that we've forgotten. Perfect. Exactly the kind of observation that might justify preserving the site for detailed study rather than reducing it to radioactive ash. But I needed more than aesthetic appreciation. I needed evidence of strategic value that would convince the Warmaster to abandon his extermination orders. Sergeant Crotus, I voxed to my senior NCO. Deploy scanning teams throughout the complex. I want detailed analysis of all structural elements, power sources, and data storage systems. Priority Alpha. Understood, sir. Looking for anything specific? Anything that suggests this site contains technology or information vital to the war effort, I replied. It wasn't technically a lie. We were looking for such evidence. The fact that we might have to create it if natural discovery proved insufficient was a detail that didn't need to be shared over open Vox channels. The real challenge wasn't finding interesting artifacts. Molech's ruins contained thousands of them. The challenge was finding artifacts significant enough to override the Warmaster's direct orders, something that would make the world's population more valuable alive than dead. My contemplation was interrupted by urgent Vox traffic from the perimeter guards. Captain, we have movement approaching from the southeast. Looks like a night lance, moving at combat pace. Through my helmet's enhanced optics, I could see them. 12 towering war machines advancing across the grassy plains like mechanical gods. Knight paladins and knight errants, their heraldry marking them as House Divine, one of Molech's most ancient noble lineages. Weapons that could crack open Astartes' armor at extreme range, operated by pilots whose families had served the Emperor since before the Great Crusade began. "Hold positions," I ordered. "Do not engage unless fired upon. Defensive posture only." The knights halted at medium weapons range, their massive forms radiating the kind of barely controlled violence that marked veteran war machines. The lead knight, bearing the golden heraldry of a house champion, activated external vox speakers. "I am Sir Caliban Divine, shield of House Divine and defender of Molech's northern marches," the amplified voice carried across the archaeological site. "You stand upon sacred ground, traitor Marines. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences of your trespass." Sacred ground. The night pilot was giving me exactly the opening I needed to justify our presence here without revealing the true nature of our mission. "Sir Caliban," I replied through my own vox speakers, "I am Captain Aurelius Thane of the Lunar Wolves Legion. We are conducting archaeological investigations under authority of the Warmaster's mandate. This site contains artifacts of strategic importance to the current conflict." "The Warmaster has no authority over Molech," Caliban replied coldly. "We acknowledge only the Emperor's command. You will withdraw or be destroyed." But I could hear uncertainty in his voice. Night pilots were intelligent and well-educated, trained to recognize genuine archaeological significance when they encountered it. If I could convince him that we'd discovered something truly important, he might be willing to negotiate rather than fight. "Sir Caliban, we have uncovered evidence of Dark Age technology in these ruins," I said, gambling everything on a bluff that might preserve both our forces and the civilian population we were supposed to be exterminating. Technology that could change the balance of the current civil war. Surely the preservation of such discoveries transcends immediate political loyalties. The knights remained motionless for several minutes, their pilots no doubt debating the implications of my claim. Finally, Caliban's voice returned, carrying cautious interest rather than outright hostility. "What kind of technology?" The moment of truth. I needed to provide details specific enough to sound credible, but vague enough to allow for future fabrication if necessary. "Energy manipulation systems that exceed current plasma technology parameters," I replied, drawing on half-remembered technical briefings from the Vengeful Spirit's tech adepts. "Computational matrices that suggest artificial intelligence capabilities, possibly even temporal manipulation devices, all theoretically possible based on what Imperial archaeologists had discovered on other worlds, all significant enough to justify extensive research programs, all requiring living populations to provide historical context and maintenance knowledge. You will permit our tech adepts to verify these claims," Caliban demanded. "If you speak truth, House Divine will assist in preserving these discoveries. If you lie, we will destroy you for defiling sacred ground with false words." "Agreed," I said immediately. "But be aware that my legion has deployed other forces throughout the system. Any attempt at betrayal will result in significant civilian casualties." A mutual hostage situation. The knights would verify our discoveries, while we refrained from attacking their undefended population centers. It bought time for both sides to assess the situation without immediately resorting to violence. As the knights maintained their vigilant watch, I gathered my senior sergeants in the ruins' central chamber. Ancient walls that had once housed humanity's greatest achievements now sheltered a conspiracy that might preserve or damn us all. "Sir," Sergeant Crota said quietly, "the men are asking questions about our archaeological mission. Some of them remember our original orders regarding population centers. My original orders: eliminate all resistance through whatever means necessary. Orders that assumed resistance included every civilian who refused to embrace the Warmaster's rebellion. Orders that 50 million people would die to satisfy." "Tell them that situations change," I replied. "Archaeological discoveries can shift mission parameters when strategic value exceeds initial objectives." But I could see the doubt in Crotus's eyes. A veteran sergeant who'd followed me through 17 years of honest warfare now being asked to participate in an elaborate deception that might or might not preserve innocent lives. Captain, Brother Lexicon approached with a data slate in his hands. I've been analyzing the site's structural composition. There are definitely anomalous energy readings from the lower levels. Something beyond standard Imperial technology. Real discoveries. Perhaps our deception wouldn't need to be entirely fabricated after all. If the ruins genuinely contained advanced technology, we might be able to justify our preservation efforts through legitimate archaeological findings. Show me, I said, following Lexicon toward a concealed entrance that led into the site's subterranean levels. The passages below were older than the surface structures, carved from living rock with precision that suggested advanced construction techniques. Emergency lighting activated as we descended, powered by energy sources that had remained functional across 25 millennia. Here, Lexicon said, indicating a chamber whose walls were covered with crystalline matrices that pulsed with soft light. The energy patterns are unlike anything in current Imperial databases, possibly quantum computational systems, though the operating principles are beyond my understanding. I studied the alien technology, trying to assess whether it represented the kind of strategic value that might justify preserving Molech's population. The devices were certainly advanced, but were they significant enough to override explicit orders from the Warmaster himself? What would be required to study these systems properly? I asked. Months, possibly years of careful analysis, Lexicon replied. We'd need tech adepts, archaeological specialists, possibly even representatives from the Mechanicus to understand the underlying principles, and we'd need the local population to provide historical context, oral traditions that might contain technical knowledge passed down through generations. Perfect. Exactly the justification I needed to transform our extermination mission into a preservation operation. If these artifacts required extensive study involving local populations, then genocide would actually undermine our strategic objectives. My Vox unit crackled with an incoming transmission from the vengeful spirit. First Captain Abaddon's voice, carrying the kind of menace that suggested he'd been monitoring our mission progress. Captain Thane, status report. Your advance appears to have stalled in the archaeological zone. Sir, we've encountered unexpected complications, I replied, choosing my words carefully. The ruins contain technology that may be of strategic value to the war effort. I'm conducting detailed assessment before proceeding with standard pacification protocols. Strategic value? Abaddon's skepticism was clear, even through the Vox distortion. Explain. Pre-age of strife computational systems, possibly artificial intelligence technology. If we can understand and replicate these capabilities, they could provide significant advantages in the coming conflict. The Vox remained silent for several minutes while Abaddon processed the implications. Finally, his voice returned with dangerous curiosity. How long for assessment? Unknown at this time. The technology is beyond current Imperial understanding. We may need to consult with Mechanicus representatives and preserve local populations for historical testimony. Another long pause. When Abaddon spoke again, his tone carried the weight of someone making calculations that could reshape the entire mission. Continue your assessment, Captain, but be aware that delays must be justified by results. If these artifacts prove insufficient to warrant preservation, standard protocols will resume. The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the crystalline matrices and the weight of 50 million lives hanging in the balance. I'd bought time, but time alone wouldn't save anyone. I needed genuine discoveries, significant enough to convince the Warmaster that Molech was more valuable intact than destroyed. Brother Lexicon, I said quietly, begin comprehensive documentation of all technological artifacts in this complex. I want detailed analysis of every system, every device, every hint of advanced capability. Sir, that could take weeks to complete properly. Then we'd better work quickly, I replied. 50 million lives depend on what we discover in these ruins. As we began the desperate search for salvation hidden in ancient stone and crystal, I reflected on the irony of our situation. We'd been sent to destroy everything noble about human civilization, only to discover that humanity's greatest achievements might be the key to preserving it. The Horus Heresy demanded we choose between loyalty and mercy, but perhaps in the depths of Molech's forgotten ruins, we might find a third option that served both. Chapter 7. Alliance of Necessity. The War Council convened in the Great Hall of House Divine's ancestral seat, a fortress that had withstood 10,000 years of siege and storm. I stood before an assembly that should have been impossible. Lunar Wolves Astartes sharing tactical intelligence with loyal Imperial knights, former enemies united by the desperate need to preserve something greater than their immediate loyalties. Sir Caliban Divine dominated the chamber's head table, his massive frame still bearing the neural interface scars that marked veteran knight pilots. To his right sat Lady Jenna Oathkeeper, House Divine's senior tech adept and keeper of ancient lore. Other knight household representatives filled the remaining seats, their faces showing the strain of warriors forced to trust those they'd been prepared to fight. "The archaeological evidence is compelling," Lady Jenna reported, her augmetic voice carrying the clinical precision of someone who'd spent decades studying pre-Imperial technology. "The quantum computational matrices Captain Thane discovered represent capabilities that exceed anything in current Mechanicus databases. If we can unlock their secrets, we could change the balance of this civil war," Sir Caliban finished. "Technology that might end the conflict before it consumes the entire galaxy." I nodded, playing my role in the deception that had become our only hope of preserving Molech's population. The artifacts were real, their capabilities genuinely impressive, but their strategic value was being deliberately inflated to justify preservation of the world's 50 million inhabitants. Our analysis suggests the technology requires specific operational knowledge that's been preserved in local oral traditions, I added. Destroying the population would eliminate irreplaceable technical data along with the lives themselves. Brother Lexicon supported the fiction with carefully prepared documentation. The computational systems appear to respond to linguistic patterns derived from ancient Molech dialects. Without native speakers to provide proper interface protocols, the technology remains inaccessible. It was all technically true, though the connections between local culture and ancient technology were far more tenuous than we were suggesting. But truth was less important than creating justification for preserving lives that both sides had been prepared to sacrifice for political objectives. "Captain," Sir Caliban addressed me directly, his enhanced eyes studying my face for signs of deception. "Your legion has deployed significant forces throughout our system, forces that remain committed to conquest regardless of archaeological considerations. How do you propose to resolve this contradiction? The central challenge of our impossible alliance? My company might be willing to preserve civilian lives, but other Lunar Wolves formations were following their orders exactly as briefed. While we conducted archaeological theatre in the northern ruins, Captain Mortis was systematically eliminating population centres in the southern continent. Time, I replied honestly. If we can demonstrate sufficient strategic value in our discoveries, higher command may be willing to modify operational parameters. But that requires keeping the population alive long enough to complete our analysis. And if your superiors decide the technology isn't worth preserving, Lady Jenna asked, what happens to our people then? The question hung in the recycled air like an accusation. Everyone present understood that our archaeological mission was a desperate gambit, not a guaranteed solution. If the Warmaster remained committed to extermination, all we'd accomplished was delaying the inevitable. Then we'll face that choice when it comes, I said, because there was no other answer I could give. Sir Caliban leaned forward, his scarred hands clasped before him on the ancient wooden table. Captain, I need to understand your motivations. Why risk your career, your life, your legion's unity to preserve people you were ordered to destroy? The question cut to the heart of everything I'd been struggling with since the Warmaster's declaration aboard the Vengeful Spirit. Why choose mercy over orders? Why serve compassion rather than conquest? Because that's what we were created for, I replied after a moment's consideration. The Emperor made us to protect humanity, not to conquer it. Whatever the Warmaster has become, whatever powers now guide his decisions, I won't betray that fundamental purpose. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then. The honesty seemed to satisfy something in Sir Caliban's evaluation. He nodded slowly, the gesture carrying acceptance of shared risk rather than simple gratitude. Very well, Captain. House Divine will support your archaeological mission for as long as circumstances permit. But we need concrete plans, not just noble intentions. The next hour was spent developing operational frameworks that might preserve the maximum number of lives while maintaining the appearance of following orders. Night households would provide security for essential technical personnel, while civilians were relocated to culturally significant sites that required protection for archaeological reasons. It was an elaborate shell game, moving populations away from areas targeted for destruction while creating justifications for their continued existence. Not a permanent solution, but potentially enough to keep people alive, until Imperial reinforcements arrived or the Warmaster's attention shifted to other targets. My tech adepts have identified 17 sites that show evidence of advanced technology, Lady Jenna reported. If we can establish research stations at each location, we could justify preserving approximately 30 million civilians as essential to ongoing studies. 30 million lives. Not everyone, but more than half the planetary population. It represented the best possible outcome given our limited options and the constraints of maintaining operational security. What about the remaining 20 million? I asked. Sir Caliban's expression darkened. The southern continent populations are beyond our protection. Captain Mortis has been thorough in his compliance operations. We've lost contact with 7 major population centers in the last 48 hours. 7 major population centers. Roughly 3 million people eliminated while we'd been conducting our archaeological charade. The weight of those deaths settled on my shoulders like a lead cloak. A reminder that even our best efforts couldn't save everyone. Sir, Sergeant Crotus approached the War Council table, his scarred features showing the urgency of a veteran delivering critical intelligence. Priority transmission from Fleet Command. The Warmaster himself is requesting personal communication with Captain Thane. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. A direct communication from Horus could only mean that our activities had attracted his personal attention. Never a positive development for subordinates operating at the edges of their orders. Understood. Sergeant, I replied, my enhanced heart's already beginning to pump additional adrenaline through my system. Prepare secure communication protocols. As Crotus departed to establish the connection, I turned back to the assembled knights. Whatever the Warmaster demands, our agreement stands. Continue population relocations using archaeological justifications. If something happens to me, coordinate with Captain Loken. He understands the situation. Captain. Sir Caliban stood as I prepared to leave the War Council. For what it's worth, you've shown more honor in 3 days than many warriors display in entire lifetimes. Whatever happens, House Divine will remember. The communication chamber in the Knight's Fortress had been hastily modified to accommodate Astartes equipment, creating a hybrid facility that reflected our impossible alliance. I stood before the holoprojector as it resolved into the massive form of Horus Lupercal, Warmaster of the Imperium and the greatest traitor in human history. Aurelius, his voice carried across the light years separating us, bringing with it the charismatic authority that had once inspired such devotion among his sons. You've been quite busy on Molech. Yes, my lord. The archaeological discoveries have exceeded all expectations. We've uncovered technology that could significantly impact the current conflict. Horus studied my face through the HoloLink with the intensity of a Primarch analyzing potential threats. His features still bore the noble bearing that had marked him as the Emperor's favored son, but there were subtle changes, depths in his eyes that spoke of knowledge no human was meant to possess. Technology, he mused. Tell me, my son, what have you discovered that's worth preserving 50 million traitors? The question's directness caught me off guard. He knew exactly what we were doing, understood the real nature of our archaeological mission. The only question was whether he would allow it to continue or order immediate resumption of extermination. Protocols. Quantum computational systems that exceed current Imperial capabilities, I replied. Maintaining the fiction, even though it was clearly pointless. Artificial intelligence technology that could provide strategic advantages. Archaeological sites that require living populations to provide operational knowledge. Interesting, Horus said, his voice carrying amusement rather than anger. And you believe these discoveries justify defying my explicit orders? No point in continuing the deception. He'd seen through our strategy from the beginning, probably monitored our activities through sources I couldn't identify. The only question now was whether mercy would be punished or unexpectedly rewarded. I believe they justify preserving human lives that serve the greater good, I said simply. Horus was quiet for several minutes, his enhanced mind-processing calculations that encompassed factors far beyond my understanding. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of decisions that would reshape the war itself. Very well, Aurelius. Continue your archaeological operations, but understand that this preservation comes with conditions. Conditions. There were always conditions when dealing with powers that operated on scales beyond normal human comprehension. What conditions, my lord? First, you will document everything. Every artifact, every technology, every piece of knowledge these people possess. If I'm preserving them, I want complete intelligence on their capabilities. Understood. Second, when Imperial reinforcements arrive, and they will arrive, you will ensure that Molech's defensive capabilities remain intact. I want the Loyalists to face the strongest possible resistance when they attempt to retake the world. The true purpose of our mission became clear. We weren't preserving Molech's population out of mercy. We were preparing a trap that would bleed the Emperor's forces white when they attempted to liberate what they thought was a conquered world. Third, Horus continued, you will remember that mercy is a privilege I grant, not a right you possess. Future operations will not include such accommodations unless justified by strategic necessity. I understand. My lord. The hololink terminated, leaving me alone with the weight of what I'd accomplished and the cost of that accomplishment. 50 million lives preserved, but only as bait in a trap designed to destroy the very forces that might have saved them. In the grim darkness of civil war, even mercy came with a price that stained everything it touched. But 30 million people would live who should have died, and perhaps that was enough to justify whatever consequences would follow. The alliance between traitor Marines and loyal knights would continue, founded not on shared ideology, but on the desperate hope that some good could be salvaged from an impossible situation. Sometimes, heresy was the only honorable choice remaining. Chapter 8. The Emperor's Arrival. The golden light that preceded the Emperor's arrival on Molech was visible even through the armored viewports of House Divine's fortress. Not the harsh illumination of orbital bombardment or the cold gleam of starship drives, but something that seemed to emanate from the realm of pure thought made manifest. The master of mankind had come to reclaim what his son had stolen. I stood in the command center that had become the nerve system of our impossible alliance, watching as Auspec's displays tracked the massive fleet taking position in Molech's orbit. 3 full Space Marine legions, the Imperial Fists, Blood Angels, and White Scars, Custodian Guard battalions, Sisters of Silence companies, and at the center of it all, the Bucephalus, the Emperor's personal flagship, carrying the only being in the galaxy who might be able to repair what the Horus Heresy had broken. Magnificent, Sir Caliban observed, his augmetic eye interfacing with the fortress's sensor arrays to provide enhanced tactical analysis. I've never seen a fleet of such size and composition. The Emperor isn't just coming to liberate Molech, he's making a statement about the price of betrayal. The statement was clear enough. Horus had sent a single company to test our loyalty, then preserved us as bait for exactly this moment. The Emperor was responding with overwhelming force, determined to demonstrate that no world would be abandoned to traitor control without a fight. How long until they achieve effective orbital supremacy? I asked Lady Jenna, whose technical expertise made her our best analyst of Imperial military capabilities. 6 hours. Perhaps 8 if our orbital defense platforms can delay their advance, she replied. But Captain, the fleet composition suggests this isn't a liberation operation. It's a reconquest. They expect heavy resistance and are prepared to level the planet if necessary to deny it to traitor forces. The irony was exquisite. We'd preserved Molech's population to serve as bait for Imperial forces, only to discover that those same forces were prepared to sacrifice every civilian life to prevent the world from serving Horus's strategic objectives. Both sides in this civil war were willing to commit genocide for tactical advantage. Then we'd better make sure they understand what they'd be destroying, I said, activating the fortress's long-range communication array. This is Captain Aurelius Thane of the Lunar Wolves Legion, requesting immediate communication with Imperial Fleet Command. The response came back within minutes, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. This is Captain Sigismund of the Imperial fists. You will surrender unconditionally and submit to Imperial justice, or face the consequences of continued resistance. Sigismund, the Emperor's champion, one of the finest warriors the Astartes had ever produced. His presence confirmed that this wasn't a routine compliance action. The Master of Mankind was taking personal interest in Moloch's fate. Captain Sigismund, I need you to understand the situation here, I replied. Moloch's population has been preserved intact. 50 million Imperial citizens are alive and unharmed, along with archaeological discoveries of significant strategic value. Orbital bombardment would destroy irreplaceable assets. You speak of preservation while serving the arch-traitor. Sigismund's voice carried contempt that burned even through Vox distortion. Whatever lies you've constructed to justify your presence, the penalty for betrayal remains the same. But another voice joined the communication channel, carrying the kind of absolute authority that made even Astartes stand at attention. The Emperor himself, speaking directly across the void. Aurelius Thane, the Master of Mankind's psychic presence pressed against my enhanced mind like the weight of stars. Show me what you've discovered. The command bypassed all normal protocols, reaching directly into my consciousness to establish a link that transcended physical communication systems. For a moment that felt like eternity, I experienced the Emperor's awareness, vast beyond comprehension, touched by wisdom accumulated across 40,000 years of human history. Through that link, I shared everything. The quantum computational matrices hidden in Moloch's ruins, the alliance with House Divine that had preserved civilian populations, the desperate gambit that had transformed extermination orders into archaeological preservation, the weight of choices made in defiance of direct commands for the sake of innocent lives. The connection lasted only seconds in real time, but when it ended, I felt hollow, as if some essential part of my consciousness had been measured and evaluated by a being whose understanding encompassed the entire scope of human existence. Fascinating, the Emperor said after a pause that seemed to stretch across centuries. Technology that predates the age of strife, possibly even the dark age of technology itself. Knowledge that could indeed influence the outcome of this civil war. My lord, Captain Sigismund's voice carried confusion and concern. The traitor Marines have preserved something of significant value, the Emperor interrupted. Captain Thane, you will maintain current positions while I conduct personal assessment of these discoveries. Any attempt to destroy or remove artifacts will be met with immediate retaliation. The communication ended, leaving our command center in stunned silence. The Emperor had granted us protected status, not forgiveness for our betrayal, but recognition that our actions had preserved something worth preserving. Did that actually happen? Sir Caliban asked quietly. Did the Master of Mankind just negotiate with traitor space marines? He negotiated with the archaeological discoveries, I corrected. We're just the custodians who happened to preserve them. But even as I spoke, I could see the larger implications of what had occurred. If the Emperor was willing to overlook betrayal in exchange for sufficiently valuable discoveries, it suggested that the civil war might not be as absolute as either side believed. Perhaps there was still room for compromise, for finding solutions that preserved what was worth preserving while allowing healing to begin. Over the next 12 hours, the impossible became routine. Imperial survey teams worked alongside traitor Marines to document archaeological findings. Custodian guard squads provided security for civilian populations, while Lunar Wolves companies maintained defensive positions. The Emperor himself descended to examine the quantum matrices in person, his presence transforming the ancient ruins into something that felt like holy ground. I accompanied the Master of Mankind through the subterranean chambers, watching as he analyzed technology that had been ancient when humanity first reached for the stars. His psychic awareness seemed to resonate with the crystalline structures, drawing forth responses that had remained dormant for 25 millennia. Remarkable, he said, his augmented hands tracing patterns of light that flowed through the quantum matrices in response to his touch. A computational architecture that operates on principles we've forgotten how to implement. With sufficient study, this could revolutionize our understanding of artificial intelligence and quantum mechanics. Is it worth preserving the population to maintain access? I asked, the question that had dominated my thoughts since our arrival on Moloch. The Emperor turned to regard me with eyes that held depths beyond normal human comprehension. Worth is relative, Captain. These discoveries could provide advantages that save billions of lives in the coming conflict, but their value extends beyond mere tactical considerations. How so, my lord? They represent hope, he said simply. Evidence that humanity can create wonders that transcend immediate political loyalties. Knowledge that serves all people, regardless of which side they choose in this civil war. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning. The Emperor was suggesting that some things were too valuable to sacrifice for political objectives, that preservation of human achievement transcended the immediate concerns of loyalty and betrayal. What happens now, I asked, to Molech, to its people, to those of us who chose preservation over orders? The Emperor was quiet for several minutes, his consciousness apparently processing calculations that encompassed factors far beyond my understanding. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of decisions that would reshape the war itself. Molech will be placed under direct Imperial protection, he said. The archaeological sites will be studied by joint teams representing all interested parties. The population will be evacuated to secure worlds where they can continue their lives without fear of becoming pawns in this conflict. And my company will face judgment for their betrayal, but judgment tempered by recognition of what they preserved, the Emperor replied. Mercy guided your choices, Captain. That counts for something, even in times of civil war. As we emerged from the ruins into Molech's azure sky, I could see the truth of his words taking shape around us. Imperial and traitor forces working together to preserve something greater than their immediate loyalties. Civilian populations being prepared for evacuation to safety rather than destruction or enslavement. Archaeological teams documenting discoveries that might benefit all humanity, regardless of political alignment. It wasn't peace. Too much blood had been shed for that. But it was a moment of grace in a war that had seemed destined to consume everything worth preserving. A reminder that even in the darkest hours, mercy could find a way to serve purposes larger than immediate tactical objectives. Sir, Sergeant Crotus approached our position, his scarred features showing amazement at the sight of lunar wolves and Imperial fists working side by side to secure archaeological sites. New orders from the Warmaster. We're to withdraw immediately and report for reassignment. I looked at the Emperor, whose expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. Permission to comply with withdrawal orders, my lord? Granted, he said. But remember what you've accomplished here. In a galaxy consumed by civil war, you found a way to serve mercy without betraying duty. That balance will be needed in the dark times ahead. As I prepared to lead my company back to our transport ships, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us to this moment. We'd been sent to destroy everything noble about human civilization, only to discover that preservation could serve strategic purposes better than annihilation. The Horus Heresy would continue. Too much hatred had been unleashed for any single act of mercy to end the conflict. But for 50 million souls on Molech, and for the warriors who'd chosen to protect them, something had been saved that was worth more than victory itself. In the grim darkness of civil war, mercy had proven to be the greatest heresy of all. But sometimes heresy was the only way to serve the light. Chapter 9. The Price of Mercy. The return journey to the vengeful spirit felt like a funeral procession. My company sat in the transport's troop bay in absolute silence, their faces showing the strain of warriors who'd glimpsed salvation only to watch it slip away. We'd preserved 50 million lives on Molech, but at a cost that was only beginning to become clear. Sergeant Crotus broke the silence as we approached the flagship's docking bay. Sir, the men are asking about what happens next. About whether the Warmaster will view our actions as success or failure. Success or failure. The question had no simple answer. We'd completed our primary objective, demonstrating the consequences of defying the new order. But we'd done it through mercy rather than massacre, preservation rather than destruction. In Horus's calculus, that distinction might prove more dangerous than outright rebellion. Tell them we served honor, I replied, because it was the only answer I could give that carried any meaning. Whatever judgment awaits us, we preserved what was worth preserving. The docking bay was filled with warriors from other companies, their armor still bearing the stains of less merciful operations. I could see it in their faces, the hollow look of soldiers who'd followed orders exactly as briefed, who'd discovered what they were capable of when all restraints were removed. The Lunar Wolves Legion was being systematically transformed into something unrecognizable. Captain Thane, a familiar voice called across the bay. Captain Loken approached our position, his weathered features showing relief at seeing us return intact. The Warmaster wants to see you immediately. Private conference in his sanctum. Any indication of his mood? Unreadable, Loken replied grimly. But the fact that you're not being arrested for insubordination suggests the Moloch operation has been classified as some kind of success. I followed Loken through the ship's corridors, noting the changes that had occurred during our absence. New iconography decorated the walls, symbols that predated the Imperium, possibly predated human civilization itself. The familiar heraldry of the lunar wolves was being systematically replaced with imagery that spoke of older loyalties and darker purposes. The Warmaster's sanctum had been transformed into something that belonged on a demon world rather than a flagship of the Great Crusade. Ancient texts lined shelves that had once held tactical manuals. Artifacts of unknown origin pulsed with energies that made my enhanced senses recoil instinctively. At the center of it all stood Horus Lupercal, but the being who turned to greet me was no longer entirely the Primarch I'd followed across the galaxy. Aurelius, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the soul. My prodigal son returns, bearing gifts of archaeological wonder and strategic innovation. My lord, I said simply, maintaining military bearing despite the wrongness that seemed to emanate from his transformed presence. Horus gestured to a chair across from his massive desk. Sit. We have much to discuss about your performance on Molech. I remained standing. I prefer to receive judgment on my feet, sir. Judgment? Horus laughed, the sound carrying amusement that held no warmth. Oh, my son, you misunderstand completely. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to congratulate you on exceeding every expectation I had for your mission. The words hit me like physical blows. Congratulations for preserving innocent lives rather than slaughtering them wholesale. Either the Warmaster had fundamentally misunderstood what we'd accomplished on Molech, or his definition of success had become so twisted that mercy could be reframed as tactical achievement. Sir, the quantum computational matrices you discovered represent technology that could change the balance of this war, Horus continued, his enhanced eyes studying my face with predatory intensity. More importantly, your preservation of the local population provided the Emperor with compelling reasons to commit significant forces to Molech's defense. Forces that are now trapped defending an indefensible position, understanding dawned with horrible clarity. Our archaeological discoveries had been real enough, but their strategic value lay not in their technological capabilities, but in their usefulness as bait. By preserving Molech's population and infrastructure, we'd created a target that the Emperor couldn't abandon, a trap that would bleed loyalist forces white in an unwinnable defensive action. The Emperor's compassion has always been his greatest weakness, Horus said with satisfaction. He cannot resist the urge to protect what he considers valuable, even when tactical wisdom demands strategic withdrawal. Your mercy has become a weapon turned against him. And the 50 million civilians? I asked quietly. Will serve their purpose admirably, Horus replied without concern. Human shields that force the Emperor to fight on my terms rather than his own. Every Imperial soldier who dies defending Molech is one less warrior available for the assault on Terra. The transformation was complete. The Primarch who had once embodied the Great Crusade's noble ideals had become something that viewed human lives as tactical resources to be expended for strategic advantage. 50 million souls preserved not through mercy, but through cold calculation that turned compassion into complicity. You seem disturbed by this revelation, Horus observed. Tell me, what troubles you about turning the Emperor's virtues against him? The question was a test, one that would determine whether I could be salvaged for the new order, or whether I remained too contaminated by old loyalties to be useful. But after everything I'd witnessed on Molech, after seeing Imperial and traitor forces work together to preserve something greater than immediate political objectives, I found I no longer cared about passing tests. Nothing troubles me about defeating the Emperor, I said slowly, choosing my words with extreme care. But everything troubles me about what we're becoming in the process. Elaborate. We were created to be humanity's protectors, the finest expression of human potential, dedicated to preserving and advancing our species' greatest achievements. What purpose do we serve if we become indistinguishable from the Xenos predators we were designed to fight? Horus was quiet for several minutes, his enhanced mind processing the implications of my words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the patient tone of a teacher explaining obvious truths to a confused student. We serve the purpose of survival, Aurelius. The Emperor's vision would have led humanity to stagnation and eventual extinction. My path offers growth, evolution, the the embrace of powers that can elevate our species beyond its current limitations. At what cost? At whatever cost is necessary, Horus replied firmly. The universe is hostile to life, indifferent to human suffering, contemptuous of our attempts to impose order on chaos. Only through absolute strength can we survive what's coming. I looked around the sanctum at the artifacts and texts that represented his new philosophy, relics of civilizations that had embraced similar beliefs and been consumed by the powers they'd thought to control. The Warmaster was following a path that led only to damnation, but he'd convinced himself it was the road to salvation. And if absolute strength requires abandoning everything that makes us human, then we abandon it gladly, Horus said without hesitation. Humanity is a transitional state, not a destination. What we become will be greater than what we were, even if the process requires sacrificing outdated concepts like mercy and compassion. The philosophical gulf between us had become unbridgeable. He saw mercy as weakness, compassion as tactical liability, the preservation of innocent life as acceptable only when it served larger strategic objectives. I saw these qualities as the fundamental purposes that justified our existence as Astartes warriors. I understand, my lord, I said, because there was nothing else to say. Do you? Horus studied my face with the intensity of a Primarch analyzing potential threats. Because your next assignment will test that understanding thoroughly. The tactical display activated, showing a star chart marked with multiple red indicators. Worlds throughout the Segmentum Solar, each one representing populations that had declared loyalty to the Emperor despite offers to join the Warmaster's rebellion. Terror campaigns, Horus explained with satisfaction. Not conquest or compliance, but systematic extermination designed to break loyalist morale. Each world will serve as an example of what awaits those who refuse to embrace the new order. Terror campaigns, the systematic slaughter of civilian populations for psychological warfare objectives. Everything I'd tried to prevent on Moloch, multiplied across dozens of worlds and conducted with deliberate cruelty designed to maximize fear rather than achieve military objectives. Your performance on Moloch demonstrated exceptional creativity in achieving strategic objectives, Horus continued. I'm placing you in command of Terror Fleet 7, 6 companies of Lunar Wolves, plus support elements from the Sons of Horus and Death Guard. Your mission will be to demonstrate the futility of resistance through whatever means prove most effective. A promotion. Recognition for the mercy I'd shown on Molech, reframed as tactical innovation that could be applied to achieve opposite objectives. The Warmaster was offering me the tools to save lives on a galactic scale, but only if I first proved my willingness to take them in massive numbers. When do we deploy? I asked. Immediately. Your first target is Vandire's world, a shrine world that's been broadcasting calls for loyalist resistance. 3 billion souls who've chosen martyrdom over wisdom. Horus smiled, the expression holding no warmth. Show them the price of their choice. As I left the Warmaster's sanctum and made my way back to my company, I reflected on the impossible situation I'd created through my attempts at mercy. By preserving lives on Moloch, I demonstrated capabilities that made me valuable to Horus's plans for galactic terror. The compassion I'd shown was being weaponized to serve purposes that negated everything I'd tried to achieve. But perhaps that was the nature of mercy in a galaxy consumed by civil war. Perhaps saving some lives inevitably required complicity in taking others. Perhaps the only way to serve humanity was to accept the corruption that service demanded. In my quarters, I knelt before the purity seal that had hung on my wall for 17 years, a reminder of oaths sworn to protect the innocent and serve the Emperor's vision of human unity. Tomorrow I would lead 6 companies of Astartes warriors to exterminate 3 billion people whose only crime was loyalty to that vision. The seal's familiar. Iconography. The Aquila, spreading its wings in eternal vigilance. The skull beneath representing the price of service seemed to mock everything I'd become, but I couldn't bring myself to remove it. Some part of me still hoped that mercy might find a way to survive in the darkness we were creating. The Horus Heresy had demanded we choose between loyalty and compassion. I tried to serve both, only to discover that in a galaxy at war with itself, even mercy could become another weapon turned against the innocent. But 50 million people on Moloch were alive because some warriors had chosen to remember what they were fighting for. In the end, perhaps that was enough to justify whatever came next. The Emperor protects, I whispered to the empty air. But sometimes, Protection required accepting damnation. Tomorrow, I would discover whether my soul could survive what service demanded.